For NY Up and Syracuse.com, this is Matt Parrino, joined as always by Ryan Talbot. And we have entered Phase 3 of off-season workouts. OTAs begin this week, and the first practice will be open to the media on Tuesday. And Ryan put out Monday eight big questions that are facing the Bills heading into OTAs. I put some of the top position battles, and we thought, let's connect, talk about some of the things we're looking forward to in OTAs as we progress through this offseason in anticipation for the 2019 NFL season. And Ryan, first and foremost, I think that it all comes back to Josh Allen. We talked about it over and over again throughout the offseason. You know, Brandon Beane putting pieces around Josh Allen, and this is going to be the first look that we get at Josh Allen with all of these new toys.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, obviously the wide receivers that they added, John Brown, a guy that can provide that speed on the outside across from Robert Foster, Cole Beasley in the slot, maybe even Andre Robertson in a smaller role in the receiving game, more so special teams there. Duke Williams, a guy that I think a lot of fans are interested to see what he can do, just because the Bills are very aggressive to add him early in free agency, you know, top CFL wide receiver in 2018. And then that also leads to the offensive line and the guys that are going to be protecting him next season, or this season.
Yeah, definitely. And, you know, with Josh Allen, I think that we saw what he was able to do with a few of these guys last year, Foster and Zay Jones, Isaiah McKenzie, who's going to be battling for a position or for a roster spot in camp. And some of these names at the bottom of the wide receiver depth chart, probably aren't getting too many headlines right now, but you look at a guy like Cam Phillips, who at times really impressed in preseason and training camp last year. He's obviously made it to a second go-around with the Bills, and there's not a lot of wiggle room, but some of these lower caliber names are people and players to keep an eye on. And then you look at the tight end position in particular, obviously a whole new group aside from Jason Kroom in the room with Josh Allen. And it's going to be interesting to chronicle how the progressions are made, specifically with the rookies, Tommy Sweeney, 7th round, and marquee draft pick, trading back up into the 3rd to get Dawson Knox. I think it's going to be interesting to see how they're all utilized and, how they all assimilate into the Bills system. That's one thing that Sean McDermott has been talking about for the past few weeks is it's now on him. He's going to take the reins from Brandon Beane and try to meld everything together on the offensive side. Obviously, Brian Daboll's going to have a big piece in that.
Yeah, without a doubt. And just like the wide receiver position, there's very little wiggle room in the tight end room. Obviously Dawson Knox, early draft pick, round 3 pick. He's going to be a guy that makes the roster. You think based on the contract they just gave Lee Smith, he's going to be their blocking tight end. And then obviously Tyler Kroft was a guy that they signed early in free agency to a sizable deal. So there's 3 right there. And then, like you said, is it going to be Tommy Sweeney? Is it going to be Jason Kroom? Will they even carry 4 tight ends? So very little wiggle room there, and this is their first chance for some of these players to kind of show the team what they can do and show that they belong on this roster.
Ed Oliver, back at minicamp, looked the part amongst tryout players, majority of tryout players. I mean, he really stood out, and this is going to be the first time we get a look at him with NFL caliber players. I mean, on that defensive line with Starlo Tulele, Harrison Phillips, and then on the outside, some of the different pass rushers. It's going to be interesting to see because obviously there's not any pads, there's not going to be any hitting, but the athleticism that's been talked about with Ed Oliver is something that I think in these kind of drills, those kind of traits could really pop.
Yeah, and he's going to be playing in a position that's better suited for his skill set at the 3 tech, where Houston had been playing him at the 0 tech the last few years. So it's also going to be one of those things where his athleticism, he's going to be able to show that off to the Bills as soon as OTAs. And like you said, there's no pads or anything at this point, but still, fans are going to be excited to hear what the media thinks about Ed Oliver tomorrow and how he looks compared to other NFL players.
We put out the position battles to kind of monitor for fans, and the real meat of that isn't going to start until training camp. But I think it's going to be very interesting to see what our starting point is. And you figure, that the team is committed to Deion Dawkins at that left tackle spot. They've said it a few times, so I anticipate seeing him there as the day one starter. But then it gets very interesting because you have so many different elements in play. You have a swing tackle, Ty Nsekhe, who was paid, a considerable amount of money for a guy that's been for the majority of his career a backup in the NFL. And then you have second-round draft pick Cody Ford, who Brandon Beads came out and, said that the team sees him as a right tackle. And, you spend a draft pick on a guy like that, and you hope that he's a contributor from day one. And I think that, if Deion Dawkins is on the left and Cody Ford is on the right, it's very interesting to see what they're going to do with Ty Nsekhe, because I think a lot of people believe whichever side he ends up on, he's going to be a starter on this team.
Yeah, offensive line is the thing that's most interesting to me, just because there's so many jobs that are up for grabs, and we really don't know how it's all going to shake out. Mitch Morse obviously will be the day, opening day starter at center. I feel good about Deion Dawkins probably being in play at left tackle as well, but if he struggles in training camp, if he struggles this summer, maybe they do say, well, listen, Ty Nsekhe has had some experience at left tackle at Washington. Let's try him out there. And if he outperforms him, maybe you put Nsekhe there and you play Ford at right tackle. And it's not just the starting offensive line. It's how is the depth going to shake out, too? Because you have some really intriguing players like a John Feliciano who has experience with Bobby Johnson, Adrian Waddle, a guy that really isn't talked about much, who in his first 2 seasons in the league, according to Pro Football Focus at least, performed extremely well, and again, that was under Bobby Johnson. So 2 players that have a connection to the new offensive line coach, 2 guys that aren't really being talked about necessarily as starters, but maybe could be key depth. Maybe they could surprise and compete for those spots. Spencer Long and Quentin Spain seem to be getting the most talk in terms of being the potential starters at guard, but it's just so much unknown at this point in the year that I think fans are going to be excited to see how all things shake out between now and September.
On the other side of the ball, you look at Levi Wallace and the success that he was able to have as a rookie. And I think, going into the offseason, most fans, media, considered cornerback pretty much set, right? With those, with Taron Johnson's emergence in the slot, and Havel Bush, who's able to kind of pop in there and help out when Taron Johnson's not healthy. But then Brandon Beane goes out and he adds 2 veteran cornerbacks, E.J. Gaines, obviously a guy that's done it in this system, Kevin Johnson, a former first-round pick. And I think that position battle for that number 2 spot opposite Tre'Davious White all of a sudden becomes one of the more hotly contested ones in camp.
Yeah, I still think Levi Wallace will end up getting that job. I think that he showed over those last 7 games that he belonged, that he could hold his own because he was tested. It's not like the opposing quarterbacks didn't throw at him. Maybe he didn't have the interceptions. He had a few opportunities that he should have come up with a few last year that were knocked away last second, things like that he kind of lost in fights. But I think the Bills would prefer to have a youthful player there like that, someone that already has a year experience in their system. But E.J. Gaines was here in 2017, and when he was healthy, that defense was clicking on all cylinders, and I believe they were holding opposing offenses to something like 16, 17 points a game. Now, mind you, he was not healthy all of 2017. He missed some time. He obviously missed a lot of time last year in Cleveland with concussion issues. So injuries are definitely something that have hampered his career, that have followed him throughout his career. So, maybe he ends up winning that job. But I think maybe the best thing for him in Buffalo would be spelling Levi Wallace at times during games, coming in for a few snaps here and there where maybe he doesn't have as many snaps as he would be accustomed to if he was starting, but he would still be a viable outside contributor at cornerback. And then, like you said, a guy like Kevin Johnson. Here's a player that has experience with John Butler, the new defensive backs coach. He has the versatility to play on the inside or outside, so maybe the Bills give him a look at number 2 cornerback, but maybe he ends up competing with Taron Johnson for the slot cornerback position because Johnson only has 1 year under his belt, Taron Johnson, that is. But he also had some injury issues throughout his rookie year with his shoulder, and that hampered him. So that could be more of an open competition than some people believe.
You brought up a great thing to monitor as well. This will be the first look we get at Matt Milano coming off of that severe injury that he's rehabbed all summer long. I did see him working out with Lorenzo Alexander back at Tyree Jackson's pro day at the facility in Orchard Park, and he looked like he was on schedule. So it'll be interesting to see, what he looks like out there with while he's rehabbing this injury.
Yeah, nationally, no one was really talking about Matt Milano last year, but I thought he was playing at a Pro Bowl level for Buffalo. I just feel like he was a guy that was flying around the field anytime that you saw a play. He was somewhere in that screenshot. He was seldom out of place last year. And it's unfortunate he went down in that game against the Jets so late in the season and ended up with the fractured and dislocated ankle. But like you said, he's on schedule to return. He's a guy that I think is his play will be critical to the success of Buffalo's defense this year, because you have these two young linebackers in Milano and Tremaine Edmonds, and both guys, as the season went on, just kept getting better and better. Edmonds especially, because he made a lot of rookie mistakes early in the year, was out of place, was a little hesitant at times. But you have two guys that could be, cornerstones to this defense. And then obviously you have the wily veteran in Lorenzo Alexander. So that linebacker unit is going to play a pivotal role in terms of the run defense. If you have guys like Star Lotulelei who are going to take on extra blockers or extra linemen, I should say, to help clean things up for those linebackers, make life easier for them. You add an Ed Oliver in there that can create a pass rush that can stop the run. And I think on paper this defense could end up being again a top 5 unit in 2019.
Mm-hmm. With Josh Allen, one of the things that I was really interested to watch back at rookie minicamp was our first look at new positional coaches. Bobby Johnson, quarterbacks coach, Ken Dorsey, and I think that that's going to be continuing to be a storyline as we head into these last 6 to 8 weeks before training camp. Is Derek Anderson is now out of the picture. He's decided to step away and retire. And one of the question marks that comes with his removal from that quarterback's room is who is going to step up into that leadership role. And, by most accounts, Matt Barkley should be up to the challenge. I think that him and Josh Allen are very close, and I think that that's something that's a relationship that's really helped him last season in addition to Derek Anderson. But I'm also going to be very interested to see how Ken Dorsey assimilates himself into the culture under Sean McDermott, Brian Daboll, how he works with the quarterbacks, what's his demeanor like, what's the dynamic between him and all the quarterbacks. When I was watching him with Tyree on minicamp, and that must have been one of his very first interactions with Tyree, I would imagine, he was very subdued, very kind of just taking it all in. And as things go along, it's going to be interesting to see if he gets a little bit more involved, a little bit more energetic, and what kind of dynamic he has with Josh, because you think back to last season with Dave Culley, and I thought at times, along with Juan Castillo, not that they were bad coaches by any stretch. I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I'm able to evaluate that, but just watching practice and just seeing the way that different coaches interact with players, and you could see, Brian Daboll is always around talking to guys, whether it be the quarterbacks, whether it be receivers, tight ends, wherever, offensive linemen, he's engaged, he's talking to them. I thought Bobby Johnson was another guy that really seemed to bring an energy to practice. And I think that that's something that Josh Allen feeds off of. I think he wants people around him. Derek Anderson was always kind of joking around with him during the stretches and making things fun for him. And I think that that's something that Ken Dorsey, a guy that supposedly had a lot of success and was responsible for a lot of the success of Cam Newton early on, I'm very interested to see that dynamic.
Yeah, and you just mentioned it, Cam Newton. There's no doubt in my mind that when Brendan Beane drafted Josh Allen, he saw a lot of Cam Newton in Josh Allen in terms of the athleticism, the arm strength, the mobility, etc. And I think that he knows the success that Ken Dorsey had with Cam Newton in Carolina. To this day, Cam Newton has nothing but positive things to say about his experience with Ken Dorsey and how much he helped him. So I think it's going to be very similar in terms of, Brendan Bean, Sean McDermott are going to say, listen, just like you were there for Cam Newton, we want you to be there for Josh Allen. We want you to coach him up. We want you to talk to him about, okay, you don't always have to throw that 15, 20-yard ball down the field. Sometimes it's okay to take those 5 or 6 yard passes to Cole Beasley or Zay Jones or whomever the case may be. So talk him up or coach him up in terms of what he should be seeing and what he should be doing on the field, but also work with him the same way he worked with Cam Newton, because those two had a great relationship, still seem like they're close with one another, and I'm sure that played a big role in why Buffalo brought Ken Dorsey in this season.
So much kudos being thrown around nationally for the offseason that, Brandon Bean and this front office were able to pull off, in a very important offseason. We talked about it ad nauseum going back to week 10, 9, 10, 11, 12 last year when the season was really looking pretty hopeless. And, so much when you build things up to the level that they were at going into the end of the season, then looking ahead to next season, the pressure was on, and Brandon Bean has delivered, but now it's transitioning, like I mentioned earlier, to the part of the process where these guys got to come together, and you're going to start to see individuals and how they fit into this room. It's something that, with all the new faces, it's probably not been discussed a lot at this point yet, but there's a big dynamic shift in that room with Kyle Williams gone and Josh Allen assuming more of a leadership role. Frank Gore now into the, in the running backs room, assuming a lot of the leadership as well. So I think it's going to be very interesting to see which personalities kind of rise to the top. Who are the more talkative guys, especially on that offensive line? I mean, from all impressions that I get from social media and what I've seen, John Feliciano, Adrian Waddle, very energetic guys, could bring some charisma into that room.
Yeah, it's interesting because you do have those veterans. You have Lorenzo Alexander, you have Jerry Hughes. Obviously, the secondary, you have both safeties, Micah Hyde, Jordan Poyer, Trey White, this is his third year. So you have a lot of leaders on the defensive side of the ball in terms of all three units. You look and also Star Lotulelei, I should say, possibly as well. He's more of a quiet guy, but I'm sure in the locker room he does work with the other guys, things of that nature. Offense, though, Josh Allen, second-year quarterback, he's going to assume more of a leadership role this year. But he's still a young player, and Frank Gore, LaShawn McCoy, those are guys that you're going to expect to step up and help out there. Wide receiver core is pretty young in terms of the Buffalo's returning players, so maybe it's a John Brown. Tight end room, it's obviously going to be Lee Smith. Lorenzo Alexander kind of talked about that. After he signed, you had a lot of players saying, oh, what a great signing. He's going to be great on and off the field. You saw some people after he was released by the Raiders say, wow, that guy was the heart and soul. I think it was actually Feliciano that said that about him with the Raiders. So they do have a lot of leadership on both sides of the ball. But now it's time for them to prove, okay, they were 6-10 last season. Josh Allen won 5 games, fared pretty well, and you've added all this talent around him. Well, now expectations are starting to go up. Good Morning Football seems to have 1 or 2 segments every week where they praise the Bills in some way, shape, or form. Gil Brandt was just talking about how he expects them to compete for the playoffs this year. Pete Prisco talking about the Bills winning the AFC East in 2020. So expectations are starting to go up, which, that can be a good thing. But if somehow this falls flat, there's going to be a lot of negativity surrounding the Bills as well. So all of a sudden there's been some raised expectations for the 2019 season.
It's going to be fun to chronicle everything that goes down in OTAs. I'll be out of practice Tuesday to bring you coverage from Orchard Park and One Bills Drive. As always, guys, for all your Buffalo Bills content, keep it locked on NYUp and Syracuse.com, and we'll talk to you next time.